Welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast, where we feature conversations with entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and artists. All right, well, welcome back to the Agents of Innovation podcast. I'm your host, Francisco Gonzalez, and I've got a really great guy here, Brian Merchant. We're here at the Miami Book Fair. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Francisco.
Well, Brian is the technology columnist at the LA Times. He's also founder of Vice's speculative fiction outlet, Terraform. And he's the author of this great new book sitting right here, Blood in the Machine, The Origins of the Rebellion Against Big Tech.
That's right.
So, Brian, we got you on the Agents of Innovation podcast, but are you just a Luddite?
I am a Luddite, but that does not mean that I am anti-innovation. And Luddites are, they're misunderstood, let's put it that way. They've been mischaracterized for a long time in this way that most people think that they hate technology, or a Luddite's somebody who doesn't get it, or doesn't get technology, or never got an iPhone, or that kind of thing. But that is not the case. The real Luddites were workers, were technologists themselves. They use machinery. They were quite good at machinery, and they saw the Industrial Revolution booming, and they saw factory owners using specific machines to try to move work into factories, to try to cut their pay, to try to sort of degrade their working conditions, basically, to try to replace them not with machines, but with children and migrant workers, people that they could pay less. So the real Luddites said, I don't think so, and they ended up forming this big rebellion and kind of taking on the factory owners who wouldn't negotiate with them, and smashing tactically just the machines that were taking their jobs. So they were not against machinery. They were against exploitation and against poverty.
Interesting. So this was what time period historically?
Yeah, this was, you could call it the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. So the late 1700s to the early 1800s was when what we would call today entrepreneurs started using machine to organize labor into little factories, some larger factories, and it's when that kind of mode of work started to take root that cloth workers started protesting and trying to find ways to adapt to that or resist that. And then in 1811 to 1813 is when kind of the actual sort of really explosive Luddite rebellion takes place.
So, interesting. I kind of want to see if you could help me and our audience understand this, because a lot of times, I teach some economics classes now and then. I also head up the Economic Club of Miami on top of other things. So I wanted to just get, sometimes when I'm talking to especially young people about the broad view of economics, I like to remind people that probably 95% of like human history, even like prehistory, human beings, we were just, hunters and gatherers, right, for so long. And then we started farming about 12,000 years ago. That started appearing all over the planet. And then it was only just a few hundred years ago that we hit this Industrial Revolution, and we had this explosion of really innovation, comforts, all the things that we think about in our modern day and age. Mm-hmm. But I also like to remind people that was a big shift in the way of living, mm-hmm. right? Like living. So tell us a little bit about that shift. Was it, what was that like? What were the benefits of that shift, and what were some of the challenges that society faced?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's probably the reason that the sort of the Luddites became as animated and as sort of popular and powerful as they became for a brief time, was because of that. It was less the specific machinery that was being used, but this shift that it was driving. So for most of the 1600s and 1700s, most of India, most of England's cloth workers sort of worked in what's called the domestic system, and that's you're either working at home in a cottage or a small shop. You're setting your own hours for the most part. You have a lot of autonomy. You're working with your family if you're a weaver, for example, and besides farmers, besides the agrarian base, this is the largest sort of base of workers in all of England. So it's a lot of people doing this domestic system, working at home, singing songs, autonomy. You have a pretty nice life. You're not always prosperous. You're not necessarily rich, but you have a lot of control and agency over your life. So this shift to factory production, where you all of a sudden have an overseer or a boss or a manager, somebody that's going to tell you, where you have to sit, when you can leave, how long you have to work. The conditions are not great in this factory. To a lot of people, that's just sort of intrinsically repellent. So people hated this idea. They had a term for it. They didn't want to stand at their command, which is sort of sacrificing their autonomy and their dignity in a lot of cases, and not to mention making less money often to go work in these factories. So they were resisting that too. And while there are benefits, as you mentioned clearly, to mass production, you can get cheaper goods. More people can afford things. There are also downsides to the mass production output too. Especially in the early days, the quality of the goods that were being produced was a lot worse. The cloth garments would fall apart faster, and this was also another thing that the Luddites protested. Because the reputation of their goods and therefore the amount that they could charge for their products was diminished, because they're competing with these automated factories. So, and then from there it gets even worse. Most of us probably know the story of the Industrial Revolution, how it was largely powered by child labor, precarious labor, people actually physically shrinking from working in such harsh conditions, and it's a product of the way that that technological development took place, really. There was a lot of pollution, there was a lot of factorization, there was a lot of sickness, a lot of maltreatment, and a lot of suffering for those periods that people had to endure before workers' movements like the Luddites kind of clawed back some protections, clawed back some sense of equality, where they could share some of the benefits that the factory owners were getting from production.
So when we go back to that period, a lot of times, when I'm teaching economics, Adam Smith is a central figure in even modern economics today, and he arose in the late 1700s to really kind of tell people really kind of study what was going on, right? The invisible hand. He's talking about all sorts of the way wealth is created, all these things. But it's basically right as he's kind of doing that is that the Industrial Revolution is starting, right? And then we get about a century after Adam Smith, we get Karl Marx. And tell me, in terms of the origins of the rebellion here of the Luddites, does socialism and communism, does that come as part of the pushback against the Industrial Revolution in terms of those conditions that people saw? Is that where that
kind of interestingly, Karl Marx did not have any respect for the Luddites, because he thought that what had to happen was you had to have all this technological advancement, and that capitalism was very good at marshaling resources, even if it was creating mass immiseration at the time, that it would sort of be this motor for technological innovation, and once you had systems that were capable of producing and creating and distributing goods, then you could seize the means of production and then distribute it more equitably. So there's some evidence that he was kind of beginning to abandon that idea later in his career, that maybe that sort of techno-optimism was not likely to happen, or that way of the revolution or whatever, because when we see the ways that his writings were put into practice, it wasn't mature, technologically advanced societies, taking back the factories. It was it was poorer countries and peasants' revolts and in Russia and stuff like that. But Adam Smith also, there's actually, I would love to see some more work, and maybe it's out there and I just haven't found it, but looking at the link between Adam Smith's teachings and sort of this and its relationship specifically to how factory owners navigated those early days of the Industrial Revolution, because there's a sense in a lot of the letters and the communications that I read as part of the archival research for the book that was that a lot of the factory owners were kind of emboldened by Smith and saying, well, this is a virtue. So even if it's causing suffering in the short term, it's in the name of a freer market. And a lot of the parliamentarians shot down the idea of intervening in trade in any way, even for things like a minimum wage or trying to subdue the suffering that was causing when you have this sort of explosion of inequality in the early 1800s. And they would cite Adam Smith. So there's a sense that he's also kind of a motor for these early people hadn't really negotiated just how free of a market would be a good thing or would, and I think there were some people who were really on board and sort of believed that this would be a good thing for humanity. I think there's some other people who are using it as a bit of a shield or an excuse to kind of, just kind of hit the gas on automation and throw people out of work and have an excuse to do it. So it's some mix of all of that. But it is really interesting to look at, because a lot of the working people, they hated Dr. Smith to the extent they called it Dr. A. Smith. They said they thought that even there's a lot of conservatives that didn't like him either. It was a really interesting political formulation at the time.
Yeah. Okay. So, what we've seen as well, we've seen a lot of wealth creation, a lot of innovation in the last few hundred years, but it seems in the last 20, 30, 40 years, I don't know, where you want to go back. You can go back to 3 days ago, right? We're talking on the edge of the OpenAI kind of disaster here that's unfolding.
Right.
Your book talking about the rebellion against big tech today as well, right? So my understanding, tell me a little bit about the book in terms of, is it kind of giving us a history of a previous rebellion and maybe talking about what's going on today?
Yeah, that's right. And it's not, there is no any Luddite rebellion in the terms that happened in the 1800s going on right now. But there are, some green shoots, right, that I think should worry, everybody from tech executives to working class people using gig app algorithms and working at Amazon factories, because we're seeing some of the same trend lines taking root. That's that we have this pretty immense gulf of inequality. A lot of people feel like they aren't being represented. They aren't being treated fairly. That the social contract in some ways has been torn up for them, just like the pre-Luddite cloth workers felt. We have a huge concentration of power in Silicon Valley and tech sectors where a lot of this development is happening. So there's a sense that a handful of folks are calling the shots and that there's not a lot of room or ability to push back. You think about Mark Zuckerberg and the unusual sort of corporate governance structure that he has, where you can't throw him out. He could do whatever he wants with Facebook, and it's a kind of a fundamentally undemocratic structure. So there's a lot of these undercurrents going on right now, a lot of tensions, and especially people who feel like their work is threatened by the new AI systems, people who feel like their livelihoods have been eroded by gig work apps that, a lot of people feel like they gave up, a certain kind of job for a more precarious one, whether that's Uber, Lyft, TaskRabbit, or whatever, and then have seen their wages fall. So there's a lot of these stressors, you could call, where if things aren't going to explode into a Luddite rebellion right now, but you could imagine a scenario where if we're plunged into a recession and companies keep automating or keep trying to transition more work to AI, see what they can get ChatGPT to do instead of their workforces, and gig work continues to be difficult, and conditions at Amazon are bad. You could imagine something like this happening. So yeah, I look at sort of the efforts to organize Amazon. I look at some gig workers who have started coalitions to try to fight for more rights. I look at some of the modern offshoots there, and it is a really interesting time because things could go any number of different ways.
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned a few things there. I think the stressors, there's a lot of stressors going on. So we could maybe debate, like maybe they did in the 1800s, about whether this is ultimately a ultimate good for humanity, right? I mean, maybe more wealth creation.
They called it the machinery question in the day.
Yeah.
Today it's like, are the robots coming for our jobs and that kind of thing.
But whatever side of that debate we fall on, I think that I think we can almost all agree on is there's stressors, right? When you're shifting to a new kind of economy. So first of all, you have a lot of people right now, middle age to retirement age, in that period, who they may lose their job and like be totally irrelevant in the current workforce because they've had a career in something, maybe even work for the same company for a long time, and now they don't know where to go, and they're having to take maybe a very low wage job just to make ends meet. Then you've got people maybe coming out of college right now, and I know a lot of young people coming out of college. Anybody really younger than me has basically been sold the idea, and I don't think anybody was necessarily lying to them. It was just what the case was, that get a college degree, you'll get a good paying job. There's a career waiting for you. They come out, there's not a career waiting for them. The job pay is not very high. Cost of living is going up, and they can't make ends meet. You see a lot of people, especially in their 20s, living with their parents, if they're lucky, if they've got parents to live with. So there's a lot of stressors.
Yes.
So what can we do about it?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a wide range of solutions that are being talked about a lot, and they range from things like UBI, the universal basic income idea, which I'm sure your listeners are familiar with, to strengthening social programs in general, to trying to give those workers more say, again, more like democratic input into how AI may or may not be integrated into their workplaces. And we saw that kind of as one of the interesting outcomes of the WGA strike, where a huge sticking point was the studios kind of wanted to reserve the right to use AI to generate a script. Mm-hmm. And the writers knew that if that happened, what they were going to do is then they were going to be asked to come in and rewrite it, which may be a similar amount of work, but they were going to get paid less and lose the rights to the property and the right to make residuals. So after that, one of the outcomes of their coming out victorious, I guess you could say, of their strike was that they, that's off the table now. The studio cannot generate original scripts with AI, so they can use AI if they, to experiment on, but it has to be on their side. So that's one interesting negotiation that I've seen kind of come out of this. But yeah, it is this really interesting time, and I think those two things that you identified are the two really worrisome areas where people, because my gut is that AI is not quite ready to do a lot of these jobs, even if it eventually will be. But then some overeager managers are gonna, sort of try to, jump the gun and maybe make some labor savings by adopting an enterprise tier AI program or something to have it do, copywriting or what the accounts payable was doing or something like that, and then kind of going, oh shoot, maybe we couldn't get rid of all those people, maybe. But then the older employees might be out of luck. Because that's unlikely that they'll be hired back. And then, Ted Chiang has a great piece in the New Yorker where he talks about one of the things that we do stand to lose from AI is all that, I guess you'd call it entry level or journeyman,
right.
tier,
yes.
where a lot of writers, it might not be their dream job to work as a copywriter, a junior copywriter at an advertising firm, but that's how they're paying the bills as they're learning the trade. If ChatGPT can do that, then they lose that. Not only do they lose that source of income, but they lose that opportunity to learn the trade too. And we can see, and that's probably what generative AI can do, is a lot of this sort of entry level stuff, writing captions, making basic graphic design for a corporate presentation slideshow or something. Things that artists and illustrators and copywriters and even we're seeing coders, entry level coders who are Copilot can automate some basic code. So coders aren't going to have the same opportunity to learn some of that journeyman stuff. So that is how we navigate that. Will be really interesting, and I think I don't have a great answer other than I think we do need to have stronger social institutions so people aren't just kind of completely out in the cold if they get automated away, and we have more and more attention. Some of that's training. I am always skeptical about job retraining programs because it's a favorite solution, and kind of the academic literature kind of says that it doesn't really work all that well, especially if it's a job, as you've said, you've sunk a lot of your identity into. It's you can have a training course on how to do something else, but you've lost a lot when you've lost that job. So I think just it's good that we're talking about it. It's good that it's on folks' radar, and again, as you said, wherever you fall on the political spectrum, I think it's a pretty inarguable that these inflection points are coming, and we're going to see these tensions, and we do have to figure out humane and smart ways to deal with them.
I think I think what you're talking about though, those entry level positions. I mean, you were just talking about writers and stuff. I'm thinking about going to McDonald's, and seeing the automated machines, and that's a person now that can't get that job. Maybe it was a minimum wage job, but the minimum wage job was maybe a first step.
Yeah.
And now that first step might be a machine.
Yep.
So that's really interesting. I didn't think about that and the implications it could have for so many people getting into the workforce and moving up.
Same thing. Yeah, same exact thing. That's exactly right. You already see them. You already go into McDonald's and you see four of those kiosks or whatever where there used to be, 4 cashiers. Now there's 1 cashier and 4 robots. It's, increasingly, at least in LA where I live, there's more there's more ordering kiosks even at non-chain restaurants. They'll just buy a little sort of tablet looking thing that you order there, and instead of talking to a wait staff. So there's service jobs that stand to be automated. Las Vegas is grappling with this. A lot of the old jobs that used to be pretty good jobs working for casinos, dealers and roulette table hosts, even those are being automated by sort of CGI avatars. And that's another interesting case where we'll have to see. Do people want that? I went to Las Vegas for the first time in a while, and I was kind of blown away. I'm like, I don't want to sit at a table with a CGI avatar. The fun of Vegas is you're in there, and it's but maybe that, maybe that can change. I don't know. Maybe that's just a sign of the times too. I kind of feel like I can look at a CGI avatar and gamble on my phone if I want to do that. But and then there's something fun about
having a real human being,
right? Yeah, and I think we'll navigate those too. They might bring some of those back. And another funny thing is they automate
those real human beings. Bring some of those back.
That's some of those old humans, the old technology humans. Yeah.
Well, you're the technology writer at the LA Times.
Yeah.
How did you get into a role like that? And what do you? I mean, do you spend your time praising any technology, or just or just looking at it? I mean, what are the things you're really kind of focused on?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like I've been pretty critical for the last couple, just because I've been in this mode. I do feel like I do have an opportunity to to sort of dig into to some of these things that a lot of folks aren't necessarily looking at. So I do kind of feel, when I see something that could be improved, that I say something, and I find that takes up a lot of my time. But no, I am not in any way anti-technology. I've got the Meta Quest goggles at home that I check out. I think there's interesting things going on in AR and VR. I think that there's really interesting stuff going on in entertainment tech. I think that there's there's interesting stuff going on anywhere. AI can do a lot of really promising stuff. But the question isn't, again, as I think the true Luddites would say, it's not about whether the technology itself is good or bad, but it's the context in which it's used and how it's being used and against whom, perhaps. And I think VR and AR would excite me a lot more if it wasn't, coming from Facebook, a company that has not had the best sort of corporate governance record over the last 10 years, and by this CEO who's not super accountable and has in some ways kind of a grim vision for monetizing the metaverse and so forth. But these things can be amazing. The experiences can be amazing. They can actually have like real liberatory potential. I know people who don't feel comfortable in social spaces, have formed groups in VR where they can, present themselves in a way that feels more true than they can in their daily lives. And there's that happened on social media. That happened across the spectrum. So there's a lot of great stuff about technology. It's just, I think, about, trying to right the ship when it's when too many of the decisions and it's being shaped too much by just a handful of people. Again, like it was 200 years ago.
Yeah. So last question or two here. One, I mean, how do you, as a technology writer, from your perspective, what are the exciting things happening? How do you envision the future going? I mean, if you were to wish for it, in terms of knowing the technological capabilities we now have, whether it's going to space, whether it's going to the depths of the ocean, whether it's communicating faster, how do you what do you think the ways that technology could be used a lot better?
Yeah, I think all of those are really interesting and great things to aspire to. I'd love to see more space travel and more space exploration than we're doing currently. I don't know about inhabiting Mars. That seems tough, but I wouldn't close my mind to it. Again, I just think that it's more, the things that I would change are more about sort of like the social and economic dimensions. I just think that we have this model, and we have, again, for 200 years, where we have just a handful of folks who have access to the resources and the power and influence necessary to make a big technological change. And right now, and sort of what this book is about, is thinking about what would it look like if things were structured differently. What if building a technology that could be appealing to the masses wasn't reliant on getting hundreds of millions of dollars of VC money? I think some of the most interesting tech work is being done in makers labs, being done sort of casually in cities where there's a high density of tech workers making co-ops and things like that. Sometimes it can be an alternative to to Uber, where people can keep more of the money rather than sending half of it to Uber. Sort of taking back some of the economic power and using technology that way. Like I said, I am really curious to see what Apple's vision for the Vision Quest Pro, what that looks like. They do amazing things with technology. I can't wait to honestly see what those experiences feel like. Again, do I wish it was coming from a different context where maybe they weren't going to try to, silo it and they're going to take 30% from every app or everything you buy, making it tougher for independent developers and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I wish that it was a little bit different, but the technology could be really cool.
So in a sense, it's, we should maybe be excited by the technology. Maybe there are concerns about AI and maybe some moral concerns and some humanistic type of concerns.
Yeah.
But in terms of the technology, is something we can be excited about. It's more the social and economic structure. And in a sense, it seems like while we're on this cusp of this amazing innovation happening, it's just being controlled by very few people.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Look at Midjourney and OpenAI and and Stable Diffusion, these big, did they do any kind of outreach to the artistic communities, the illustrators, the authors guilds, all these who their work stood to impact in a very big way before they unleashed their products? Or did they have any sort of dialogue beforehand? No. And that's not necessarily their fault. This is the model that has been inculcated into all of us and is the norm, and the last sort of generations of precedent has been set that way. But we end up in this situation where they've made millions of people extremely upset, extremely anxious. They've caused this big disruption. And now, as much as we're focusing on how cool the technology is, some of that's overshadowed by class action lawsuits, by people worried that they can't earn a living. So the question is, how do we bridge this gap? How do we develop the technology in the first place in a way that gives more people more say over how it's going to affect them? And again, I don't really have all the great answers for that. But again, it does seem to be that a few people made these decisions that are now affecting millions of other people, and that has been kind of the case for the last generation at least of technological development, where sometimes it works out for the better, you could argue. Google is, I think everybody is happy we have Google in our pockets, that we can find information at our fingertips. That's great. But if something like Facebook is a lot more, it's done a lot of damage to the world, and fostering toxicity and misinformation and some pretty bad stuff abroad where it's regulated and looked at even less. So but we have to deal with it. We have to fight basically a rearguard action against the things that aren't so great about it. So how do we improve this process? How do we give more people more access to the decision making process, to the technologies themselves? So I think that there's a lot of progress we can make there. And because I am excited about a lot of these technologies. Some fellow tech critics may disagree, but that's where I venture. I am a technology columnist. I think technology can do great and wonderful things for people, but it can also, when put in the hands of the wrong folks, it can also do immense harms.
So would you say maybe in some ways decentralizing the power and in a sense the corporate power, obviously like say a Facebook having all these decisions that are made, but also maybe decentralizing the epicenter? Like we talk a lot about Silicon Valley. Well, we're sitting here in Miami, and a few years ago, some people started saying maybe Miami will be the next Silicon Valley. Maybe it's Austin, Texas. Maybe it's Nashville. Whatever. But what I think interesting. I don't know if you have any commentary on the way that people are now moving and spreading out to different cities. And on top of that, I've spent some time in Latin America, and I've seen a lot of digital nomads, whether it's in Medellin, Colombia, or other places, Mexico City. A lot of people are moving there. People can kind of move and work remotely from different places. Maybe there might be some dismantling of just everything concentrated in Silicon Valley. I think that'd be
a great step and a big help. But I mean, we also see a reason, because we see those headlines and maybe Austin and Miami, but then the locus tends to be pretty stubbornly stuck in San Francisco and in Palo Alto, and all the tech giants have more or less kept like the locus of power there. So finding ways to decentralize, I think, helps. Finding I think it's hard terrain to navigate, but a lot of innovators and a lot of young entrepreneurs that I've talked to have kind of quietly said, it'd actually be pretty great if we could break up the big tech companies. But, they don't want to say it out loud because they also hope that they'll be acquired by them, maybe. But it's also this huge stifling force on innovation, sort of writ large. I still think there's people in doing great stuff, innovating incredible new technologies. But when you have this market force that's as vast as, say, a Google or an Apple, there's two things that can happen. One, they can either try to see a competitor, clone it and crush it, or they can kind of absorb it into them and shelve it. Or, best case scenario, it either is successful on its own, or it gets bought and then utilized to the satisfaction of those involved. I'd say that's probably the rarity these days, and there's a lot of people who really feel like that big tech kind of wields too much power, even from an innovation standpoint. It's stifling at this point. I just did a column about a medical device tech company called Massimo, who the founder made a technology called Joe Chiani, called pulse oximetry tech, and it takes measures of the readings of blood of oxygen in your blood rather, and it's a life-saving device. It's marketed mostly to hospitals and to those who have ailments. But when Apple was developing the Apple Watch, it took meetings because they wanted to have some health tech in there. They took meetings with Joe Chiani about 10 years ago, and Joe Chiani was like, wow, they might acquire my company, or we could partner. I could get this tech out to the widest stage possible. That'd be great. But instead, it turns out Apple had no intention of acquiring or partnering. Instead, it just started hiring his executives, who quickly started filing patents for Apple. He felt that his technology had been stolen, and it's been 10 years worth of lawsuits, and actually the International Trade Court just ruled in his favor that said, yeah, Apple is putting your tech into the Apple Watch, and if they don't take it out, then we can seize it at the site of import. So that was it's just one of these cases where we could imagine so many better outcomes. What if they had worked together and had this productive partnership, and the tech was great and everybody benefited? But instead, I think Apple found it more profitable because they know they have such power that they can. Again, that's all alleged. That's just what the lawsuits found. But I thought it was a pretty striking example. So, yeah, I think, breaking up big tech, decentralizing that Silicon Valley sphere of influence, getting more eyeballs and more hands on deck would be a great thing.
Yeah, no, I think you hit a lot of points there. I think innovation, when it's kind of controlled, or you have to work with others to innovate, and that would have been a great opportunity for those companies to cooperate. Yeah. And obviously, you have a big company with a lot more money, a lot more power, and kind of willing to take advantage, I guess, of this other company to seize its technology for its own purposes, not really for the purposes of maybe the broader humanity in a sense. So, but lots we can keep talking about, Brian. I'm sure you'd be. But it's great to see you here at the Miami Book Fair. You got your book here, Blood in the Machine: The Origins of the Rebellion Against Big Tech. Not a short read, so you got a lot of information in this book.
Yeah, but it looks bang for your buck.
Yeah, I know it's been featured and reviewed in a lot of places, so I know it's getting a lot of notoriety, and we'll continue to follow you. How do we follow you? Where's the best places?
Oh, I'm on X at BC Merchant, and also on Blue Sky and Mastodon. I think of the same. BC Merchant. Thanks so much for having me.
Great, and you're also in the LA Times.
Right? I am the tech columnist of the LA Times, so you can read me there.
Great, and I'll put all this in the show notes. So thanks again for being an agent of innovation and being on the Agents of Innovation podcast, even if you're a little bit of a Luddite.
Happy to do it.
Cheers. Thank you, sir. Yeah.